Welcome to Great Automotive Lives. I'm your host, Andrew, the classic car guy. I'm a motoring writer, photographer, and now, inexplicably, in the chilly autumn of my career, a Johnny-come-lately podcaster. This podcast aims to bring to life the stories, histories, intrigue and drama surrounding some of the automotive world's most interesting characters. Some may be well known, others less so, but I hope you will find all, in some small way, warrant you investing a little of your listening time hearing about lives remarkably lived. If nothing else, I hope something you hear today prompts further reading, listening or watching. All that said, shall we crack on?
Why the Life of Max Hoffman.
This great automotive life should finally and emphatically highlight the difference between great automotive achievements and legacies and really nice, honourable and honest lives well lived. These factors can be, and sometimes are, mutually exclusive, dear listener. Episode 5 about William Morris Lord Nuffield,
please have a listen if you haven't already,
raised a few questions about his character. It seems that Max Hoffman's life was more overtly and decisively suspect in terms of the accuracy of its moral compass. After all, veteran industry insider and polymath Bob Lutz would put Hoffman close to the top of his shadiest people I have ever worked with list in 2019. He said of Hoffman,
his charm and persuasiveness were famous, and his credentials were above reproach, but most of his success was built on bribery and extortion.
We can assume that Bob meant to add,
but not in a good way,
at the end of that summary. So why is Hoffman's today's subject? Well, with a tangible impact on the North American success of at least 21 car marques, Hoffman's importance in the post-war automotive landscape is hard to ignore. Also, there is a tiny bit of me that feels some empathy for him. His role in the 50s, 60s and 70s would always ultimately be self-defeating. His success as a promoter and importer would inevitably and ultimately lead to his replacement by a factory-owned operation. Perhaps his numerous, usually litigious and painful corporate divorces and big severance deals were just part of his business model and a way to back-end his remuneration. See if you agree or disagree as I present to you the great automotive life of Max Hoffman.
The Life of Max Hoffman.
In many ways, Max Hoffman's relationship with Jaguar is emblematic of how he seemed to conduct business matters, and so worthy of a tad of early unpacking. Shortly after he opened his swanky 487 Park Avenue, New York showroom, Hoffman held Jaguar firmly in his sights. With the passing of many decades, it's now pretty hard to imagine Jaguar being essentially unknown in the United States of America. William Lyons, and a hot prospect to be the subject of a future episode perhaps, had only founded his SS Cars Limited in 1935. He had enjoyed a quickly closing window of peacetime in which to raise a profile across the Atlantic, and so few were likely aware of the marque in North America. For reasons that probably require no explanation, Lyons suddenly found the SS brand less than helpful in the immediate aftermath of World War II. As such, the firm's name was changed to Jaguar Cars Limited in March 1945. Lyons would simply and diplomatically say,
unlike SS, the name Jaguar is distinctive and cannot be connected or confused with any similar foreign name.
This pragmatic flex would have meant that post-war America would know virtually nothing of this fledgling British manufacturer. Hoffman knew about them, of course. He was a man who took his business seriously and made it a priority to know every dark nook and desolate cranny of the European automotive landscape. He had visited Jaguar's Holbrook Lane factory as early as 1945, but he found a disorganized minnow of a company struggling to secure raw materials to produce anything much. Despite his dismissal of Jaguar as an immediate source of high quality and quantity stock, he clearly resolved to keep an eye on their progress. It was no surprise then that Hoffman made sure he was dockside when the first Jaguar Mark IV made landfall in January 1947 on its way to Fergus Motors, an established New York car importer. Hoffman was so impressed by the Mark IV that he was soon placing his own orders with the Holbrook Lane factory in Coventry. Jaguar, for their part, were so focused on exports so early in their development for purely pragmatic reasons. Post-war Britain had adopted an export or die philosophy in order to encourage an influx of economy-repairing foreign funds, especially dollars. By way of a persuasive incentive, the government prioritised supplies of rationed steel for products destined for foreign markets. Foreign sales then were manna from heaven for Jaguar from wherever or whoever they came. These early Hoffman sales brought him to the attention of Lyons and his representative Bert Henley. During 1947, Henley was authorised to offer Hoffman a distribution contract for the eastern United States, but Hoffman couldn't reconcile the offer with the floundering setup he had only recently visited. Despite that, Hoffman would continue to place orders with Jaguar, and Jaguar would continue to gratefully accept them. By the end of 1948, Hoffman had shifted 171 Jaguars via his New York showroom and through other dealers that he was supplying countrywide. Jaguar were pleased, of course, but the wily William Lyons was also growing a little wary of Hoffman's approach. Lyons would describe Hoffman as living
day to day,
based on his tendency to leave imported cars in bond until each individual one was needed and only then to pay for it. You could argue, of course, that it was simply Hoffman's business acumen writ large. He already had Park Avenue-sized overheads and no tangible surety of supply, so carefully stewarding that all-important cash flow was critical. In any event, Lyons didn't love it. What Lyons grudgingly did love, however, was Hoffman's swanky premises, and he liked even more the effort Hoffman made to promote the new Jaguar XK120 in 1949. Hoffman secured the biggest stand at the 1949 International Auto Show in New York and made the thrilling new Jaguar sports car not only the star of his stand, but the star of the show. His reward followed in quick time, and in May 1949 he signed his first distributor contract with Jaguar. Lyons' circumspection almost oozed from every term and each condition of the contract, however. It was configured to run for just a year at a time and stipulated the purchase of 527 cars within the year. Quite a high bar considering the 171 units shifted in the prior year. Hoffman had a curvaceous ace up his sleeve, however, the Jaguar XK120. The XK120 really captured the zeitgeist of post-war America, and it was instantly desirable and desired, despite it costing over double that of the equivalent Ford model. Despite imposing that stretching sales target, it was almost as if William Lyons wanted Hoffman to fail. The demand caught Jaguar somewhat on the hop. The XK120 was originally conceived as a special edition alloy-bodied model. Just 200 units were originally planned, but primarily based on Hoffman's latent demand, Jaguar reconfigured it as a steel-bodied, full-production model. This volte-face meant a delay in supply until 1950, but despite this, Hoffman kept on peddling the coupe and taking orders hand over fist. It was during this febrile period that some more of Hoffman's unorthodox approaches bubbled to the attention of Lyons. None other than the British Consulate General of New York wrote to Lyons to complain that Hoffman was selling cars for which he had received no firm or committed delivery date from Coventry. It also came to light that Hoffman was imposing his own restrictions on dealer orders for the XK120. More than one complained that they were forced to take a Mark V saloon with every XK120 that they ordered. Lyons was clearly conflicted. He liked the sales, but he did not like the methods being associated with his precious Mark. The XK120 was great news for Hoffman and was making him a great deal of money, which made him happy. This encouraged him to approach Lyons to propose a 10-year contract between the two parties. Lyons remained characteristically cautious by claiming that a yearly renewal was a British standard, but did give a little ground by committing to the annual contract renewal continuing to be offered for the next 10 years. This seemed to placate Hoffman enough for him to invest in his expanding operation and opening a branch in Chicago. Despite further investment, American Jaguar customers were often critical of Hoffman's maintenance and post-sales service. Lyons was a stickler for the quality of his products and the reputational value it engendered. These critical mumblings were causing Lyons more angst. The growing disquiet was only exacerbated when word reached Lyons that Hoffman was now insisting that dealers ordering an XK120 would only get their order fulfilled if they also took 2 Volkswagen Beetles. By this time Hoffman had fallen in with Wolfsburg, but was finding the German people's car hard to shift to American people. In true Hoffman style, he was now using the popularity of the XK120 as a lever to shift some of the less desirable Wolfsburg metal. If dealers didn't agree, they were told they would get no XK120s at all. What Hoffman lightly considered as shrewd business, Lyons considered as tantamount to corporate treason. Lyons consulted his lawyers, who quickly poured cold water on the idea of legal redress. Lyons needed his own people on the spot, clearly, to keep an eye on proceedings, and so Hoffman received a letter from Lyons in December 1952 to inform him that Joe Erdmans had been appointed as chief executive of North American sales. Lyons assured Hoffman that Erdmans was there to help his efforts, but Hoffman can't have been reassured when Jaguar secured an office for Erdmans directly across the street from Hoffman's showroom. In short order, Erdmans dug up some interesting tidbits. Firstly, Hoffman had undoubtedly set up probably the world's largest Jaguar service and maintenance centre in New York, with 5 stories and extending to 75,000 square feet. The aptitude of the mechanics working there, however, was much less impressive, which was resulting in most of the owner dissatisfaction that Lyons was hearing about. Much more provocatively, however, Erdmans discovered that Hoffman had taken on the distributorship for Mercedes-Benz during 1952. This was seriously bad juju on a number of levels. Lyons saw Mercedes-Benz as Jaguar's biggest foes, as they threatened Jaguar both on the road and on the track. More worrying still, Hoffman had actively colluded to conceal this new arrangement from Lyons, to the extent that he even set up a new company called Distinguished Automobiles Inc. to handle the Mercedes relationship. Lyons was furious, as his contract with Hoffman specified that Jaguar was to be consulted before any other distributorships were accepted. Lyons would have never agreed to a Mercedes-Benz relationship, but ultimately, as Hoffman probably knew, there was little that could be done other than Lyons vociferously demanding that the 2 marques didn't share showroom space in Park Avenue. This eminently reasonable demand prompted Hoffman to commission the famed and feted architect Frank Lloyd Wright to design a dedicated Jaguar showroom. This was located just a couple of blocks away from the original showroom at 430 Park Avenue. The new showroom was an impressive affair, featuring a circular ramp with space for 7 cars rising up from a centrally placed turntable at street level. The centerpiece was to be a large bronze leaping Jaguar statue emerging from a veritable and verdant thicket of indoor plants. Hoffman even managed to extract $40,000 from Jaguar to go towards the considerable costs associated with this upscale venture. Lyons travelled to New York in 1954 to see the sparkling new showroom for himself. Later, at a hotel nearby, Lyons' pent-up disgruntlement with Hoffman got the better of him and an ill-tempered shouting match broke out. Lyons resolved there and then to curtail any further dealings with Hoffman. On the 13th of January 1955, Lyons sent Hoffman a letter, and the following extract neatly summarises the gist of this missive.
The proof is inescapable that Jaguar's interests have deteriorated more and more to the advantage of others. Instances are continuing to reach me where I'm told you have abandoned any semblance of loyalty to our product and have spoken of it disparagingly. I'm convinced that we can no longer tolerate this situation that now exists and has existed for some time past.
Lyons finished off by declaring that he was convinced that this was
ample justification for a prompt and complete severance of the relationship between us.
Surprise, surprise, Hoffman saw it differently. To his mind, he had an earlier letter from Lyons effectively granting him distributor rights until 1961. Hoffman never replied to Lyons' letter, but instead instructed lawyers to sue Jaguar on the 31st of January 1955. Ultimately, after Jaguar had spent nearly $25,000 defending Hoffman's suit, they lost. On top of this cost, they also lost control of the new showroom and the $40,000 invested in it. They were also ordered to pay Hoffman a royalty for each Jaguar imported to the USA for a 2-year period. The sum was widely reported to be around $50 a car, which, if true, would have granted Hoffman around $400,000 of unearned income over the next 2 years. It must have all been a tremendously bitter pill for Lyons to swallow. The silver lining, and perhaps adequate moral compensation of course, was Jaguar now gaining full and direct control over its North American operation. Meanwhile, back at the Frank Lloyd Wright showroom at 430 Park Avenue, a large overseas package had just arrived. It was the weighty bronze Jaguar Leaper, designed specifically for the showroom's elaborate centerpiece. Now surplus to requirements, it was never unwrapped and simply returned to sender, presumably at Jaguar's cost, knowing Hoffman. Maximilian Edwin Hoffman, he would later drop the second N on his arrival in America, was born in November 1904, close to Vienna in Austria. His father was Jewish and his mother a Catholic, and it was a decidedly middle-class beginning. His father had inherited a grocery shop, but had also branched out into the manufacture of sewing machines and later bicycles. One of Max's earliest jobs was applying their home-brewed plating mixture onto bicycle frames, a skill that would help him again later in life. Max got his start in motorised transport when in 1920 DKW released a 122cc two-stroke engine that could be fitted to bicycles. Max was soon racing DKW-powered bicycles before switching to an actual DKW motorcycle and then on to a British AJS 350cc single, then one of the world's fastest production motorcycles. He became a frequent winner at races in Germany and Austria. When Max's father gifted him a French-built Amel car, he was instantly won over by this four-wheeled mode of transport and competition. He immediately raced the Amel car with much success, enough to encourage Austrian firm Gross and Friedman to obtain a license to build Amel cars near Vienna under the trading name of Grofri. Grofri even selected Max to be their factory driver, and he would continue to compete until 1936. By this time he had developed other involving business interests and had become an agent for importer Smoliner and Krake, who were instrumental in bringing many foreign car marques to Austria. Before long, Hoffman's irrepressible ambition led him to form his own firm, Hoffman and Huppert, and become the exclusive Austrian importer for Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Alfa Romeo, Talbot, Delahaye and Volvo. Hoffman even achieved the feat of being Volvo's first official agent outside of Sweden. Business was going well for Hoffman, But the political landscape was fast turning pretty ugly. Terrifying rise of the Third Reich in neighbouring Germany was too much of a risk for Hoffman, given his Jewish descent. He relocated to Paris and set up a showroom there to continue his passion for car importing and trading. By 1939, however, France declared war on Germany, which necessitated Hoffman fleeing Paris in a hurry with his mother Ida in tow. After a short while posing as farmhands in Holland, Hoffman was able to secure places on a Portuguese ship bound for New York in June 1941. Initially, despite his English being pretty poor at that stage, Hoffman planned to start an automotive business almost immediately. Plans to export trucks to Egypt were already well advanced when America pivoted industry towards manufacturing for the impending war effort, and steel and other metals were heavily rationed. This essentially killed the automotive industry almost dead overnight. But Hoffman, ever the reinventor, spotted another totally unrelated opportunity. Even before America officially joined the war in December 1941, many men were already being drafted, and women were stepping up all over the continent to fill their places in industry and commerce. This created more disposable income amongst the female population, but the lack of available metals simultaneously throttled the jewellery sector. Hoffman had discovered a process whereby metal and gold coatings could be applied to early plastics. It all reminded him of plating bicycle frames for his father, and he was pretty good at it. In no time he was crafting metal and gold-plated plastic jewellery to sell to all the working women who were suddenly so ubiquitous. This became a thriving business and kept Hoffman both busy and financially comfortable while the war raged on. As soon as it became possible again in 1946, Hoffman was back off to Europe to visit potential suppliers for his soon-to-be-founded car import empire. By the following year, he had opened his eye-catching and high-profile showroom at 487 Park Avenue and was advertising himself as the sole US distributor for illustrious marques including Alfa Romeo, Lancia, Delahaye, and he also claimed to represent Daimler and Lanchester. Given this roll call of marques, you'd think 487 Park Avenue would be rammed with cars upon its opening in early 1947. The cars themselves, however, were harder to secure than the arrangements to sell them in the immediate post-war period. Just one car filled the window of the showroom in those early days, but it was a beaut, a Delahaye 135M Cabriolet with bodywork by Pennock, and finished in a striking shade of fire engine red. The car was a sensation and created much valuable publicity for the Hoffman Motors Corporation. During these early days, Hoffman was collecting car brands like most people collect stamps. Austin, Lagonda, Lee Francis and Simca would soon join the Hoffman fold. Donald Healey, coincidentally the subject of Great Automotive Lives Episode 2, in case you were tempted, called in on Hoffman during a 5,000-mile promotional tour of the USA, and soon enough, Hoffman was representing Healey in North America. During his career, Hoffman was thought to have been significantly involved in at least 21 car marques, and we have neither the time, inclination, or indeed strength of voice to cover these all, sadly. There are three prominent Hoffman relationships, however, that are probably significantly emblematic of the power that he held over his suppliers that are, hopefully, worthy of a bit of a delve and a dive. Despite Daimler-Benz's export sales director reporting of Hoffman that he makes no favourable impression, Hoffman secured the distributorship for Mercedes-Benz cars in the eastern United States, covering the 31 states east of the Mississippi River in 1952. As we have already heard, Hoffman was duplicitous about concealing this appointment from Jaguar, even asking Mercedes-Benz to keep the Hoffman Motor Corporation name off any correspondence. Another new Park Avenue showroom was deemed appropriate, with a bright and luxurious space being configured at number 443. A sublime 300 SL race car took pride of place in the new showroom. 300 SL was fresh from victories at Le Mans and the Carrera Panamericana, and Hoffman would exhibit it at various events round New York, and it never failed to draw a crowd and cause a stir with its unique gull-wing door configuration. However, at this stage the 300 SL was purely a competition car, and no Mercedes-Benz was available to fulfill America's appetite for a fast sporting model. It didn't take long for Hoffman to join the dots, and soon he was appealing to the Mercedes-Benz board to produce a slightly toned-down version of the 300 SL for the road, both in gull-wing doored and ultimately convertible form. Mercedes' new general director, Fritz Konecki, was amenable to the idea, no doubt encouraged by Hoffman's promise to order a significant number of cars to kick things off. Reports tend to vary by source in a range between 100 and 1,000 cars. A road-going 300 SL along with the new 190 SL were made available for Hoffman to showcase at the 1954 New York International Auto Show. Hoffman was quickly able to send the following telegram back to the board at Stuttgart. Motor show, tremendous success, stop. Mercedes stand best at show and new sports cars talk of the town, stop. Hoffman's influence with Mercedes-Benz didn't just extend to the headline-grabbing demands for new models, but even to more mundane and workaday matters. Hoffman didn't care for the drab colours that Mercedes seemed to offer in their home market, and he also pressed for leather upholstery, which Americans were well used to. Both enhancements were eventually made available at Hoffman's insistence. Things were going well for Hoffman and Mercedes, so much so that Stuttgart asked Hoffman to take on the distributor role for the whole of the country in 1953. Undoubtedly, Hoffman was thrilled. It would be his first nationwide representation of a car marque. A new Hoffman showroom was soon taking pride of place on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, with Hoffman now having his own dealerships in New York, Chicago and Los Angeles. A Max Hoffman-style problem was starting to be noticed by Mercedes-Benz. Hoffman was covering the whole country and supposedly serving 40 or so sub-dealers. In practice, it became obvious that Hoffman was giving a tangible preference to his own outlets, basically at the expense of everyone else, including customers. Heinz Hopp was Mercedes-Benz man on the ground, and he would later say customers suffered badly from Hoffman's sales structures that landed them with a luxury automobile but offered them no prospects of reliable servicing for it. Sound familiar at all? The cracks were starting to show, and trust had been compromised back in Stuttgart. In 1956, Mercedes-Benz commissioned a report into Hoffman's organisation that was now called Mercedes-Benz Distributors, Inc. The report found that the company ultimately served around 230 dealers, but just 4 of these had any formal contracts in place. Some of these so-called dealers were surprisingly configured. One was a clothing store in Maryland, and another was found to be conducting business from a tent. Oh dear. This blockbuster report quickly brought relations to a head. Mercedes-Benz were ready to ditch Hoffman, but of course he wasn't going quietly. In the end, it cost Mercedes-Benz somewhere between $2 and $2.5 million to get Hoffman to walk away. The deal would leave Mercedes with the Frank Lloyd Wright agency in New York, as well as Hoffman's former Hollywood operation, and quite possibly a rather bad taste in their mouths. Hoffman's association with Porsche dated back to the Paris Motor Show of October 1950. This relationship was noted less for a terribly acrimonious falling out and more Hoffman's constructive contribution to Porsche's stateside success. He'd been enthusiastic about the embryonic marque since he saw a picture of the first Porsche in 1948. At the Paris Motor Show, he finally had an audience with Dr. Porsche and his son Ferry. Hoffman had secured an early 356 model just a few months before the meeting, and had come armed with a raft of suggestions to make the diminutive coupe more US-friendly. Porsche was politely interested, but remained pragmatic. His was a young company and not yet ready for geographic product differentiation. Porsche had modest ambitions, telling Hoffman that he'd be happy to sell just 5 of his 356s a year in the American market. In true alpha male form, Hoffman replied, "If I can't sell 5 a week, I'm not interested." An agreement was reached with 15 cars a year, a minimum threshold. Hoffman was insistent on a more American-appropriate displacement, however. His early model had a mere 1.1-litre power unit, and Hoffman and his potential customers needed more. By the end of 1951, 356 was packing a 1.5-litre engine, giving a 50% increase in power over the original 1.1-litre car. The 356 more than proved its worth as a competition car, and Hoffman soon got a bee in his bonnet about having a stripped-back model that could be driven to the racetrack, stripped of any superfluous bits and bobs, raced, put together, and then driven home again. It definitely needed to be a roadster too. Porsche produced a special roadster based on Hoffman's desires in the shape of the Type 540. This was an aluminium special with a curvier body and stripped of weighty bumpers and accoutrements. Hoffman referred to the Type 540 as the sports roadster, but the nickname America Roadster soon seemed too sick. Just 17 America Roadsters were made and all passed through Hoffman's hands. Meanwhile, the standard coupe and convertible was selling rather well. Hoffman shifted 32 Porsches in 1951 and a mighty 238 in 1952. By 1953, the new Austin Healey 100, did I mention episode 2, and Triumph TR2 were proving popular, and both were significantly cheaper and more powerful than the 356. The convertible 356 was weighing in at $3,645 at the time, and Hoffman figured he needed a sub-$3,000 offering to better fend off those pesky British invaders. Porsche was receptive, based purely on Hoffman's overtures, and soon a de-specified 356 Roadster was developed with removable side screens instead of wind-up windows, a rudimentary rain cover hood, and a cut-off and removable windscreen. The Porsche Speedster was born. The Speedster came in at a touch over Hoffman's $3,000 target price, however. Not to be thwarted, Hoffman engaged in some creative marketing and accounting. His adverts led with a $2,995 ticket price for the Speedster, but listed fittings like heater and speedometer as optional extras. These were in fact factory standards on every car, enabling Hoffman to charge more than $3,000 for each unit. A crafty move. A total of 1,034 Speedsters were sold during its inaugural year. By 1959, Hoffman sold and distributed 2,800 Porsches, providing the marque with a tenfold increase over his originally pledged 5 cars a week. This time, rather than a big shouty, lawyered-up showdown, Hoffman suffered from the inevitable trajectory of a marque approving a decent level of market penetration and recognition. In essence, Porsche now felt willing and able to row their own North American canoe. Learning from both Jaguar and Mercedes-Benz experience, Porsche were keen to avoid a legal bin fire. Eminently grown-up negotiations were entered into, but Hoffman inevitably prospered quite nicely nonetheless. A $150 royalty would be paid to Hoffman for every Porsche imported to the US until he had received a total remuneration of $1 million. Nice work if you can get it. Somewhat like Porsche, Hoffman had long harboured designs on BMW. At that time, BMW was a smaller operation like Porsche that Hoffman felt he could effectively exert control over. He had to bide his time, however, as existing arrangements with Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar and Porsche kept him busy and presented potentially disruptive conflicts of interest. Matters moved on a little when BMW started working on a mid-range sports car with designer Ernst Lulf in 1954. Hoffman had seen a prototype of the proposed model and he didn't like it. He deemed it not suitable for significant sales in his US marketplace. Hoffman, however, had been following the work of another German designer, who was then domiciled in New York, Albrecht Graf von Goertz. Goertz had produced a sketch for the program of the New York International Motor Show, and Hoffman thought it could be perfect for the proposed BMW sports car. In October 1954, Hoffman scribed a letter of introduction, effusively recommending Goertz to BMW and including some sketches of the design in question. Hoffman was forming a plan, and a $5,000-ish BMW sports car would fit perfectly between the Mercedes-Benz 190 SL and the 300 SL in his exalted sports car lineup. On Hoffman's recommendation, Goertz was put under contract to BMW to develop a purely American-centric 507 sports car. Hoffman made sure he was kept firmly in the design and development loop and pressed for his must-haves of an automatic transmission option, good heating and ventilation, and a practical boot, or what some people call trunk. Hoffman suggested to BMW that if the trade price was right, he could shift between 3,000 and 4,000 units annually. BMW's size, however, meant they needed a partner who could offer some capital to segue the 507 from an alloy-bodied special to a steel-bodied production model. A credit line of $1 million was agreed with Hoffman's bank, and the first order of 2,500 507s was tentatively placed with BMW. BMW expected half of that credit line by way of a deposit, however. The agreed price to Hoffman was $2,700 per car. Hoffman arranged a splashy launch of the 507 at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where 300 potential dealers were wined and dined. Hoffman touted a $4,999 retail price to the attendees. Hoffman might have had a hefty credit line sitting in the bank, but he was traditionally averse to significant upfront outlays, and so he delayed payment to BMW and failed to sign a contract. Without Hoffman's significant down payment, BMW couldn't move the 507 from aluminium hand-built configuration to a steel production-ready model. The competitive landscape was changing in the US too. By 1957, the Chevrolet Corvette had evolved into a full V8 high-performance car at an annoyingly competitive price. Buyers in this segment now had an essentially a binary choice. For outright prestige, they would opt for a Mercedes-Benz 300 SL. But for low-cost V8-powered thrills, a Corvette would ably fill the brief. The 507's market niche had effectively evaporated. No wonder then that Hoffman never made his down payment and kept shrinking the size of his potential order in dramatic increments. Ultimately, Hoffman sold just 16 507s, with a total of only 254 cars produced in total. The debacle very nearly resulted in BMW's bankruptcy and led to an immediate schism in relations between Hoffman and the German firm. Given all this, it's hard to reconcile then that within just 3 short years, Hoffman would win back his BMW distributorship. Yep, you couldn't make it up. It seemed a new key player had rocked up at BMW, and let's just say he and Hoffman saw eye to eye. Nod, nod. Wink, wink. Paul Hanneman became BMW's global sales chief in 1960, and Hoffman wasted no time in getting his foot back in the BMW door. More amazing still, BMW commissioned private investigators to report on Hoffman in some form of due diligence. Seemingly the due given to Hoffman wasn't that diligent, and despite one interviewee referring to Hoffman as Adolf Hitler of the auto industry, and again, probably not in a good way, Hanneman championed his return to the fold. This return coincided with the launch of the BMW 1500 or New Class, an advanced offering, but one that initially sold only modestly. It was with the arrival of the 1600/2 two-doors sedan that sales of the mid-size BMW started to perk up dramatically. The 1602 was light, hence nimble, and fairly Spartan, allowing for an attractive $2,500 retail price. Hoffman, of course, desired a more powerful version, but emissions regulations made the zestiest version, the 1600 Ti, auto absolute non grata in the US. In Germany, however, there were a few versions of the 1600 to which Alpina had fitted the 2-litre M10 engine at customer request. Hoffman took much credit for pushing and cajoling BMW to produce the 2002 for the American market. It almost certainly wasn't his idea alone, but the sales of this 2-litre car that Hoffman was able to facilitate soon made everyone forget that. The 2002 rolled into US showrooms in 1968 and a little over 9,000 were sold that year. 1969 saw Hoffman sales breach the 5-figure threshold for the first time with a mighty 11,638 BMWs sold. Despite these successes, the BMW board had, guess what, got wind of the nature of their dealings in the USA, and that wind smelled rotten. In October 1971, a surprise announcement was made about the sudden and unexpected resignation of Hannemann, with just conflicting views on future business policy cited as the reason. It seems that Hannemann was on the make in almost every aspect of the USA operation. Bob Lutz, remember him, was drafted in from Opel to replace Hannemann and charged with untangling all the twisted webs that the outgoing director had woven. Lutz quickly identified Hoffman at the centre of this web of deceit and corruption. Lutz set up a meeting with Hoffman, later saying,
"When you were at lunch, you couldn't ask for a funnier or more charming companion."
He qualified that by going on to say,
"The flaky guys in the car business, they're all great guys to know, you know, John DeLorean, Colin Chapman, Alejandro de Tomaso. All these guys are wonderful guys to be with, you just don't want to give them money."
At their first meeting, Lutz's suspicions about Hoffman were soon confirmed. Lutz would report that Hoffman said, "I want you to do well. Everybody at BMW who is my friend has done well, and I want you to do well. All you have to do is take good care of me." When it became apparent to Hoffman that former Marine pilot Lutz wasn't in the Hannemann mode, the tone of discourse changed somewhat. Hoffman would now say, "You should be healthy. You should live a long life. Very important Italian friends of mine know you want to take my distributorship. They are my friends. I like them, and I take good care of them." Things had suddenly strayed into horses' heads under the duvet territory. Lutz was a tough ex-Marine, however, and wasn't to be easily intimidated. Hoffman would go on to remark that he may not be the best distributor in the world, but he knew how to draft a bulletproof contract. That was certainly the case with the BMW distributorship. After all, Hoffman by now had plenty of practice, and his friend Hannemann had made sure Hoffman's contract was as robust as it was long, stretching all the way forward to 1986. Time to lawyer up, boys. The following litigation was long and tortuous. With Hoffman now 70 years old, BMW had hoped that he might be focused on getting his affairs in order before imminent retirement. They were deluding themselves, of course. Hoffman saw the BMW distributorship as the culmination of his life's work, and almost his company. When the company-owned BMW North America was opened in September 1974, the legal hostilities were still rumbling on. It took until the following year before matters were finally settled. BMW essentially bought out the Hoffman Motor Corporation in its entirety, and Max Hoffman had ensured that every paperclip, drawing pin, and treasury tag, ask an old person, had been valued and accounted for. The consideration paid by BMW? $23,500,000 great US dollars, or around $135 million in today's terms. There is rather a lot in the "ignored due to lack of time" column in my research notes for this podcast. True Hoffman scholars will be shouting, "That English idiot didn't even touch on Alfa Romeo, Fiat, Volkswagen, the Hoffman House, the Hoffman Foundation, or anything. Rubbish." Well, you're right, and I apologise profusely. However, this podcast really should be considered as just a starting point, and please feel free, if not actively encouraged, to continue your reading about Maximilian Edwin Hoffman. A great place to start would be by getting yourself a copy of Miles Kornblatt's $1 Million Middleman book. Hoffman died in 1981. In spite of all his painful and costly corporate divorces, he had met his wife Marion in the mid-1950s, married her in 1956, and remained with her until his death. Marion would pass away in 1983. They would leave no progeny behind to enjoy their great wealth, but instead funded an eponymous charitable foundation that is still active to this day.
The life of Max Hoffman in summary.
It seems to me that Max Hoffman was what a New Yorker might call a piece of work. He was clearly focused on success, but that success was primarily designed to enrich him and feather his own nest. The best interests of his manufacturers, dealers and customers came a poor and distant second. His hunger for money appeared to only be matched by his need for recognition and plaudits. It all sounds frighteningly familiar in 2025, does it not? Okay, so maybe Max wasn't the guy you'd invest your trust fund with, but his methods for shifting foreign metal in the critical North American market seemed effective at a very basic level. By the time he was forced out of the BMW relationship for the second time, he had bought over 80,000 of the Bavarian cars to the continent. I think where he fell down, however, was in his need to control everything himself. What he needed was a steady colleague, an equal, an honest broker that could manage the post-sale machinations quietly and effectively while he got on with the showy sales process. Someone who could quell Hoffman's less desirable traits in the interest of all his stakeholders. What can't really be disputed, however, is Hoffman's pivotal role in bringing some of the world's most desirable and exciting cars to the American masses and paving the way for their enduring success and popularity to this day. And that's a worthy legacy in and of itself.
In the footsteps of Max Hoffman.
If you wanted to immerse yourself in the life and times of Max Hoffman, there are a couple of options still open to you. While his various Park Avenue premises have long morphed into banks and probably a Starbucks or three, his so-called Hoffman House still stands. This edifice may come as a belated surprise to you, given that I have singularly failed to mention it prior to this point. In brief, a year after Frank Lloyd Wright designed Hoffman's Jaguar showroom in Park Avenue, he also designed a home and garden for Max and Marion. The 5,800 square foot L-shaped home sits on a nearly 2-acre plot in Rye, New York, overlooking the Long Island Sound. Whilst it is still standing and represents a seminal architectural landmark, I'm pretty sure you can't stroll up to it and wander around at will. Designer Marc Jacobs of Daisy, Daisy, Daisy fame bought it in 2019 for $9.175 million. And whilst I'm quite sure Marc is a fine man, I'm equally quite sure he is also a private one. Perhaps you can get a glimpse of this architectural gem before the attack dog rips your throat out. Let me know how you get on. If you manage to escape from the jaws of Marc Jacobs' dogs, compose yourself and make your way to 6000 Northern Boulevard, East Norwich, which is about an hour's drive from the Hoffman House. Here you will find the Hoffman Centre, a 155-acre nature reserve and sanctuary with quite a tenuous connection to Max Hoffman, to be fair. The centre was purchased in 1996, long after Max and Marion had passed away, but was bought by their foundation to preserve some open space and natural habitat in an area that Max knew and loved. There is a historic manor house at the centre's heart, which has been lovingly preserved and restored. The centre seemingly opens its gates to the public occasionally for hiking, picnicking, and simply dreaming of owning a 300 SL. If you know of any other ways to walk in the footsteps of this great automotive life, please drop me a line. A contact email address is helpfully provided in the show notes, if I haven't forgotten. Happy motoring.
I might be a computer-generated voice, but Andrew, the classic car guy, is disappointingly human. Please leave a review, share, like or comment on his faltering podcast efforts. It's the sort of thing that makes the weak and vulnerable bag of flesh seemingly happy. Thank you.
I truly hope you found today's Great Automotive Life interesting, inspiring, or at the very least a useful jumping off point for your own onward journey of discovery. Much like an underinvested and dysfunctional mass transportation system, I'm reasonably likely to amble along again at some undefined point in the near, medium or far future to invite you to join me on another automotive tangent of discovery. Inevitably, and for the sake of brevity, the fascinating details of this great automotive life have been significantly distilled, and so preemptive apologies are offered for glaring omissions, of which there are probably many. Your input and feedback is welcome, of course, on the understanding that I'm pathetically thin-skinned, so go easy with me. A contact email address is trepidatiously provided in the accompanying show notes. Until then, please tell many others if you enjoyed this podcast. It not only helps me avoid becoming moodier and more irascible, but also helps others find the podcast and generally makes the world a tiny bit nicer for a vanishingly small number of people. If you hated it, tell no one. Until next time, dear listener,